Well, thank you, Brian and Ginny. I think I stand with the rest of the group that this was fascinating. We are thrilled to have the next speaker on the stage. We're very lucky to have him in our presence. We just got a little bit of flavor. Our next speaker is Vint Cerf. And Vint Cerf is the Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist at Google, where he contributes to global policy development and continues to spread the internet. He's currently working on interplanetary internet initiatives together with NASA to effectively standardize communication between planets. So raise your hand in the room if you are also doing that. I think there's only one guy in the room. Please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Vint Cerf.
Thank you. Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate the opportunity to join you today. Ginny's talk was really very thought-provoking. I did want to make one small point that there's more to the standards on the internet than the World Wide Web Consortium. There's another organization called the Internet Engineering Task Force. That's where the real TCP/IP protocols came from. And Tim Berners-Lee built his HTML and HTTP on top of that. So I'm not going to tell you things that you don't already know, I think, but maybe I'll reinforce a few ideas for you. Let me start out by observing that money is not a new idea. It's been around for a long time. It's a wonderful intermediary in lieu of having a barter system where you would have to figure out who can I trade to get this in order to trade with that in order to get that guy to give me the thing that I want. So money has been a great invention, and you guys, many of you, are involved in making it even better. Of course, then we graduated from physical currency and things to checks and credit cards and online transactions and things like that. And now, of course, we've got PayPal, and electronic funds transfers. And you're all very much involved in various aspects of that. So today, there are all these buzzwords that clutter our thoughts that involve financial technologies. We're all impacted by this. But there is just one message that I want you to take away from this talk today, if you get nothing else out of it. And that message is, it's the software, stupid. Everything that you do, everything that we depend upon, every single device that we put into our ecosystem has software in it. And that's the problem. That software makes autonomous decisions. It does things on our behalf, but it does it without our intervention. And we're relying on that stuff to work. We're relying on it to be resistant to various forms of attack. And we are not doing a very good job of that. You're not doing a very good job of that. I'm not doing a very good job of that. And that's the core problem that we have to solve. So, look at the good side of all this. Think of all the things that you already do and that you're imagining that you could do with financial technology. Global and local commerce. Help people plan for all the various financial events in their lives, whether it's birth and medical care or education, housing, and so on. All those things require thoughtful planning. And our software services, I don't mean our at Google, but our collective software services can actually help make people's lives better by helping them plan. What about improving the quality of government? Making things more transparent. When the first CTO was put in place, Anish Chopra, and the first CIO was put in place in the current administration, one of the tasks was to make the spending of the government more transparent. And Vivek Kundra built this big database that you could drill down into the funding legislation to see how much money was spent and on what and to whom. And that was a very powerful tool. So there are lots of things along those lines. Ginny mentioned transparency, which I think is a very important element here in helping people, including us, understand what's going on. So there's an opportunity to make things more efficient by making that data accessible and understandable. It can also be used to expose corruption and malfeasance. And at Google and in other companies, we tried very hard to open up to make visible what's going on. For example, our transparency report, which talks about the demands that are made on us by governments around the world, including our own, for information about our customers, our users. Making all of that as visible as possible is a very helpful way of exposing various kinds of corruption. And finally, the automation of a lot of this increases the velocity with which money moves and therefore increases the potential for GDP and income per capita growth. So we have some good things that we can collectively do with this technology. But then there's the bad side. What about the bugs that actually show up in the software? I mean, let's face it, for the last 70 years, we've been trying to figure out how to write software that doesn't have any bugs in it, and we have failed. And so we have to admit the existence of bugs, and worse, when we fix them, we create new ones. And so there's this question about the software that we're either creating or relying on. How long will those bugs get fixed? Who will pay attention to fixing them? Will they take the responsibility for that? Or will they throw up their hands and say, this is old software and we aren't going to use it anymore? So we're not going to support it either. What about updates to the software? If you admit that the software has bugs and it needs to be updated, how do you make sure that those updates actually happen? And how do you make sure that the updates are not themselves corrupt? It's not that they introduced a bug, but somebody actually faked the update, digitally signed it to make it look like it came from a legitimate source, and now somebody has malware running in a particularly important system. So how do you do that? What are the mechanisms by which we achieve those updates? One of the things that disturbs me, and I hope it disturbs you, is that in general, we have very weak authentication of the parties that are engaging in financial transactions. At Google, after we announced that we'd been attacked in 2010 and our systems had been penetrated, we introduced a two-factor authentication system for every employee. As a Google employee, as an executive, I do not have access to everything that's in the company's ambit. I don't even get into any of the systems without using a two-factor authentication device. So I have, in addition to my Google badge, I have a little USB device that plugs into my laptop that generates a cryptographic exchange between my laptop and any of the Google-based systems that I'm trying to get to. And I will be denied access if I don't have legitimate right and reason to get into that. So two-factor authentication for us has been an important platform. We make it available to others. It's awkward. There must be some irreducible amount of inconvenience that good security introduces. Our job, of course, is to keep that to a minimum, but there is a certain amount of inconvenience that two-factor authentication introduces. I will tell you that I am really comfortable and happy when I am forced to use that second factor, because I know it's protecting me from somebody getting access to my usernames and passwords. We also have problems with integrity, with the information that we transfer around. Using digital signatures and methods like that can help assure that the data we move around hasn't been modified and altered, and I think that's very important. Another thing which I worry about, and I hope you do too, is that the user interfaces that we build suck. They are too complicated. The engineers who build them, and I'm just as guilty as anybody else, think that everyone has a PhD in computer science, and of course it's obvious what you're supposed to do. And of course the answer is it isn't. And so making ourselves see our interfaces through the eyes of ordinary human beings is a really important task. And it's something that I hope we pay attention to, especially in the financial technology world where so much is riding on those transactions. And finally, configuration. I don't know about you, but when I sit down and have to configure a brand new device, I just got a new laptop, I just got a new mobile, I used to have a nice head of hair, and it's all gone now as a consequence of frustration with trying to get things configured properly. We really could use some artificial intelligence to help us make that work better. But it's so important because misconfiguration leads to disaster. And I can tell you that most of the really big, messy things that happen in the internet are the result of somebody misconfiguring a router or misconfiguring some other table somewhere. And so we need to pay a lot of attention to that. What about the ugly part? Well, privacy, safety, and security don't get enough of the right kinds of attention. Headlines, yes. You'll hear the words repeatedly in this conference over and over again about privacy, safety, and security. But we haven't done a very good job, in my opinion, of actually achieving those objectives. We've got the malware, DDoS back, all this stuff. You can read it just as well as I can, I think. I do want to impose upon you and the engineers that work for you a burden of responsibility, an ethical burden. If you build software that people are going to be relying upon, you have an ethical responsibility to do your very best to make it work properly, to avoid bugs, to detect bugs, to announce them, to distribute updates and software. You should feel a burden of responsibility for that. I worry about, not about artificial intelligence, but autonomous software, because it's making decisions that we're not in the middle of. And that software has to work because we're not in the middle of it. It's not just the self-driving cars. What about program trading? That's a robot. Some people say it isn't. But look, it's taking information from the outside world, making decisions, and then doing something, and having an effect on the outside world, like your bank account. And I consider that to be as robotic as that thing that was sitting here earlier today. And finally, there's this question of us as users. Do we understand the risks that we're taking when we use these applications? Do we understand the risks we're taking when we don't bother with two-factor authentication? We need for ordinary people to understand this, just like they know to look 2 ways before they cross the street, especially if they're in the UK when the cars are coming from a different direction. So the good news is that these are not unsolvable problems. Ginny mentioned standards, and good for her, because they are very important. They are the way in which you achieve interoperability by everybody agreeing to do something in common. But we need better incentives for improving security, safety, and privacy. I'm not exactly sure what they are. Some of them may be the threat of litigation. You hear cybersecurity is becoming a very popular thing these days. It doesn't solve anything. Just because you have cyber insurance doesn't mean that your system isn't going to tank. It just means that if you have a financial liability, the insurance company might be able to cover some of it. But it doesn't make security and safety and privacy any better. So please don't confuse those two. If I had one thing that I could do as this last shot in the academic world, it would be to build better systems for designing and implementing software that help you avoid making stupid mistakes. I mean, I literally want this thing sitting on my shoulder, looking at the laptop while I'm writing the software saying, okay, you just screwed up. What do you mean I screwed up? Well, there's a buffer overflow. What do you mean there's a buffer? Look at line 35. Okay, holy crap, you're right. That's a buffer overflow. I need that kind of help, and so do your programmers. We don't have those kinds of tools, in my opinion, in place. And that's where the academic community should be delivering on its promises. In terms of user experience, we desperately need to make users do the right thing by figuring it out, by in fact, understanding what they should do to make themselves safe and secure. We obscure a lot of that with interfaces that are confusing and complicated. And I suspect that natural language processing and artificial intelligence will have a role to play. So that's the last slide, and I have 2.5 minutes left. So, and I'm going to ad lib for one of those minutes just to take the opportunity to do that. And thank you for coming to this event. And the reason that you deserve some thanks is that it's taking time out of your day. It's perhaps making you think about things that you hadn't thought about, which makes some people uncomfortable. And it gives you an opportunity to walk away with some ideas that you didn't have when you walked into this room. And from my point of view, I can't speak for the organizers, but from my point of view, if the only thing you come away with as a result of being here is a new idea, or maybe a way to tackle a problem that you hadn't thought about, it was worth it. It was absolutely worth it. The only other thing I am really curious about is that 6 months from now, I wonder if there are going to be some business deals and some new ideas and some startups that happen as a result of the casual conversations that take place around these small tables. I want to emphasize the brilliance of the organizers of picking these little small tables. Sometimes they'll do 8 and 10 people tables. You can't have a conversation with 8 to 10 people. But with 4, 5, 6 people around the table, your ideas can fly. And so I can hardly wait to see what happens 6 months from now. I just wish there were a way to track what the hell you people are doing, to find out whether this produced any new results, any new businesses, and any new ideas. So with a minute left, I thank you for your time. and I look forward to hearing more this afternoon.